Yesterday, I finished reading Return of the Strong Gods by Rusty Reno, R.R. Reno, and this book has it all if you want to figure out our way forward in the Western world. Let's go.
That the terrible catastrophes of these decades arose from the fact that men were swept up by terrible ideological passions, and that the key to a future without, prevent never again Hitler, never again Auschwitz, we had to dial down the temperature of civic life. And these passions I describe as the strong gods, or the objects of our passion are the strong gods. These are the things that really rouse our intense sense of loyalty.
For anyone new to the channel, my name is Casey. I've been a therapist for 13 years, a husband for 10, and a concerned citizen for 10 years because I see the degradation and the falling apart of the Western civilization that we've worked so hard to build. And I see it every day in the individual appointments I keep. I see it in the lives of our civil society. And I want my children to have better. And I presume you do too. So fatherhood is a fight. Let's rumble right, and let's rumble toward a better society for our kids.
The events of 1939, 1945. Yet it exerts this incredible grip on our political and moral imagination. And that really begs for explanation.
In Return of the Strong Gods, Reno does a cultural diagnosis on how we got here. And part of the way that he determined that we ended up in the logical endpoint of liberalism was because the ways that the open society began with Karl Popper in the late 40s after the big destruction that had taken place in society. They decided that strong passions like those that lead to things like nationalism, populism, and even religion were the reasons for the war in the first place. And so he diagnoses that the open society, started by Karl Popper and then proliferated by people like George Soros, has determined that no strong passions should be present in our modern era.
1914 to 1945 was a civilizational catastrophe in the West. Americans, World War II was a good war. We won.
The terms of the open society and its enemies may have looked noble at first in its attempt to avoid things like the Great War and the Second Great War that they had been through. But the liberalism that they put forward led to a tyranny of its own, where no strong passions would be able to dominate society, and therefore nihilism set in. And we've been living through that nihilism really from the beginning of the turn of the 2000s, at least, if not far before that. And those passions have had an upswell and even led to things like populism and reversion to things like nationalism, which we see taking place in Italy, in Hungary and Poland, and in the United States. And there has really been a determined break between countries like Canada, the UK, and Australia, and the United States, and some of the other Western countries that have more adopted populism as the way forward again, and Trump being an obvious signal of that populism. From a psychological standpoint, this makes a lot of sense. Humans are wired for in-group preference. That means people that behave and sometimes look and act in certain ways in accordance with what our beliefs are people that we have a preference for, much as we did in tribal era long gone. So we crave belonging and derive meaning and purpose from not floating in a sea of infinite options, but by being anchored in family, faith, and nation. Reno calls these the strong gods, and those are the loyalties and loves that bind us together and give life shape. So if we do not have these strong gods availed to us, then we become the listless and nihilistic generations that you've seen over the course of the last several decades.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
The attempt to suppress the strong gods have failed. We see it growing in a hunger for nationalism, cultural identity, and tradition. We see the return to the strong gods in the revival of interest in church, especially among Gen Z, in liturgy, in tradition, in rootedness. It's almost as if the soul itself rejects a life of perpetual openness and demands something solid to cling to. Popper, in his work, The Open Society and Its Enemies, even attacks Plato, and he attacks the black and white nature of truth itself, saying that in fact needed to go if we were going to have a peaceful society. Well, my question to you is this: how does that peaceful society look to you? Does it look like a lack of passions has given us into this open society that's been a liberal bastion? Or does it look like we're more divided than ever? And in fact, those strong passions may have been what anchored us to the good, true, and beautiful in the first place.
Too much ideological fervor, too much nationalism. Nationalism became a bad word in the post-war era. And, I look at Karl Popper's book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Very important to have the Manichaean good versus evil, friends versus enemies template. And it turns out that one of the great enemies of the open society is Plato. And if you look and you read, it's a very detailed kind of attack on Plato, the first volume of Open Society and Its Enemies. But be that as it may, Karl Popper identifies truth as a strong god that has to be driven out of society.
My question after completing the book is this: will we return to the strong gods in healthy ways through church, through humble confidence in our country and nationalism and populism? Or will we return down the road towards nihilism and that in fact become a strong god of its own, actually a weak god in this case, or in the case of what Reno would say is those things that are just nebulous and incapable of giving us the meaning and purpose that we need to provide for the future and for our children's future in a strong, healthy, confident nation.
I say, hold up, wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Reno provides us with a warning and an invitation written in 2019, and with an addendum that's more recent. He says this: the age of the open society is ending, and what will rise in its place is up to us. What we do with the return of the strong gods will determine what happens for generations to come. I will not go into that without putting up a fight, and that's why I started this channel, and that's why I will continue to try to build a future that is the best possible for my children, but also a legacy that provides the meaning and purpose for me and for my clients, as a therapist, and for the future of the church and the West and our civilization that we care so much about. It's time to return to the strong gods.